Here we go.
Here we go. All right, so we are live, but I'm not sure we're live everywhere yet. So let's just give this a second to warm up. All of these things take a second to travel. Okay, we're live on YouTube now. At least we are on my end. Are we live on your end? We're good? Okay. So hi, everybody. Tina-Desiree Berg here with your Friday version of Right Wing Insanity Report. I have Leila Charles Leigh with me, who is the co-host of Punch Up Pod. I brought her on today because I want to devote the entire show to what is going on right now in Israel and Palestine, because as far as I'm concerned, this situation is absolutely the inevitable outcome of right-wing insanity run amok for a very long time now. I'm going to get into the details of what exactly I mean by that, but just as an opening overview, I want to talk about how right-wing insanity, whether it's theocracy, ultranationalism, authoritarianism, these brands of political systems have an inevitable outcome of producing what we're seeing right now, whether it's othering the other group in the sense that they become dehumanized. That other group is not as good as I am. They're not our group. They're not part of our tribe. Therefore, they're bad. Whether it's just ultranationalism, where you want to exclude everybody else, xenophobic beliefs, racist beliefs, things of that nature, or theocracies. You can either be a democracy or you can be a theocracy. You can't be both. I have very strong opinions on this. I'm not sure what your opinions are on this. But let me say without equivocation, these belief systems are running amok on both sides of this conflict. I know that might piss some of you off that I'm saying that, but it is true. The difference being, however, is that Palestine is part of an occupied territory. It is not a sovereign nation. This is not a war. So when the United States media says there's a war going on between Israel and Hamas, I don't think that's the right way to frame it. You cannot go to war with an occupied territory that you are in charge of taking care of, that you have been having a military occupation and blockade of for decades. So that's just a ridiculous statement. What I will say is I feel this is more akin to an act of domestic terrorism. And maybe the best way to find your way through all of this is to address the problems that are leading us to this particular space and time, because we didn't get here overnight. And as far as I'm concerned, the writing has been on the wall that what happened last week was going to happen. And you've even had left-wing Israeli Jews warning the government that this is going to happen. If we keep doing what we're doing, the inevitable outcome is that the oppressed individuals are going to, fight back. So today, we will probably piss off both sides of the aisle in discussing this, but I hope you stay with us and understand that this is a difficult and nuanced conversation. And let's get into it. Leila, what are your opening thoughts on the things I just said?
I agree with you entirely. This has been going on for 75 years. I think a lot of the U.S. especially has been heavily indoctrinated and propagandized, and it's only been over the last couple decades that I've sort of found my way to what the truth is. It's all horrifying, but you're right. It's not a war. It's a genocide of an occupied territory on people that don't have an army. There is no Palestinian army, right?
Right.
So as you said, it's a group of terrorists, but also, as you said, what are people supposed to do when they don't have water, they don't have electricity, they don't have medicine, they are bombed indiscriminately, their homes are stolen from them.
Collective punishment. This is a war crime. I mean, this to me is like, let me give you a really good example of what this amounts to me. This is like saying there's a group of Aryan Brotherhood folks in the middle of Idaho. They're anti-government. They're anti-Semitic. They've planted pipe bombs, committed hate crimes. We need to do something about them. So most Americans be like, yeah, we need to do something about those guys. They're bad. Now, if our government said, okay, this is what we're going to do. We're going to bomb the entire Idaho state, and we're going to also bomb East Washington because that's part of the American Redoubt. We're just going to keep bombing until we get those guys. If some kids and civilians die along the way, that's perfectly acceptable, whatever. They are hiding the Aryan Brotherhood from the rest of us. Nobody would accept that. Nobody. I mean, come on, man, really? But what is the difference here?
Well, they've successfully, the prime minister said there are no innocent Palestinians, right?
And which is insane. That's insane.
Appalling to dehumanize people, especially half of that. I mean, it's not 2.5 million people anymore, but we know half of Gaza is under 18, right? They didn't vote for Hamas.
No, they did. That's another thing that I'm tired of hearing.
It's ridiculous. Like that's some, beacon of democracy. And, we have a democracy here in the States. I do not want to be held responsible for George W. Bush's war crimes, Obama's war crimes, Trump, right? So like that collective punishment. But also if you flip it around, if you say, listen, 1,400 Israelis were killed and, innocents, although, some of them were probably IDF soldiers. And also on that side, everybody's conscripted into the army. So
yeah, they don't have a choice there. Also, I would like to mention that a couple of the folks that were killed were actually peace activists that have spent time in Gaza that were Palestinian rights individuals. They got caught up in this too. Again, Hamas is a terrorist organization that's not up for debate. Yes. They absolutely have killed women and children. I'm not necessarily talking about this last go around, but look into their history. They did suicide bombings decades ago, right? When they were forming a separate entity from Fatah, which was the secular. So also, I feel like I need to mention this. If folks don't know, a lot of Palestinians aren't Muslim, they're Christian. There is
they just bombed the oldest church,
which was a Christian,
Christian church. And Netanyahu helped finance and promote Hamas because
you're correct on that,
right?
You're correct.
So chaos in Palestine,
divide and conquer,
right? Exactly. So, but also, if it seems like the people in Congress are wholeheartedly endorsing this idea of sort of collective punishment and revenge, this bloodlust because innocents were killed. But if you turn that on the other side, then anybody in Palestine would be wholly justified for bloodlust.
I agree.
Right?
I agree. This argument should apply both ways, but it never does. Let me also mention this. They are not killing terrorists right now by this indiscriminate bombing. They are absolutely killing civilians and children. That is not up for debate.
Yeah.
I also want to mention there was a report out of Democracy Now! Where some of the Israeli hostages have been killed by these bombings. Are you kidding me? I don't understand how that's acceptable. Why isn't Netanyahu, who incidentally is very unpopular, so I think folks need to know that too, why isn't he trying to negotiate with these guys? I mean, it would take him coming to the table and saying, listen, I get it. And he doesn't get it. And maybe he gets it and he doesn't care. Maybe that's how extreme his, that's how extreme his right-wing extremism is, right?
Right.
But it would take him saying, like, these guys have a legitimate beef. If you have the ability to shut off the electricity and water for a territory, there's something wrong here. You cannot continue to say that I have this ability, or I'm going to bomb the Rafah crossing multiple times. I'm going to tell all of you guys to go to the south, and I'm not going to allow Egypt to open a crossing so you can escape, and I'm going to bomb it multiple times. Like,
after telling you have safe passage.
There's no place for these folks to go. This is insanity. This is absolute insanity.
It's the kettling of a whole people. It's just horrifying. And sorry, you said something that made me think of something.
Oh, sorry.
And now I can't come to it. So yes, I agree with you entirely. I think, the other thing was, Hamas, yes, they're terrorists.
Yeah. That's not up for debate, by the way. So if anybody thinks that's up for debate, then just stop yourself now. Look into their history. That's not up for debate.
But some of the hostages who were either released or escaped that first concert on October 7th said that many of the hostages who were killed by IDF soldiers who just shot indiscriminately into the crowd.
Okay, I hadn't seen that. That's insane.
So, and that was on the electronic Intifada. I'm going to get his name wrong. Anyway, I have documentation, but, I think what you're saying is right. And, I grew up hearing all this sort of propaganda about Mossad and how they had precision missiles, and they would make a phone call to a terrorist, a Palestinian terrorist. He'd pick up the phone, make sure he was there, and a second later, the bomb would come in the window. It's like
and nobody innocent would die. That is mythology, but it's the same mythology. You're right. George W. Bush sold the American people on, right? The same thing happens in Israel. No group is monolithic in its beliefs. But the unfortunate reality is that, and I did not come to this place until late in my adulthood as well, because we grow up, especially in the United States, we're not given the full story. Our media does not report on this situation authentically. No. If you're growing up in a Jewish household, you're just never taught to question what's going on. But then all of a sudden, one day you start looking into things. And in my case, I had some leftist Jewish friends that were like, yeah, no, what? And they would start telling me things, and I'd be like, oh, that's horrifying. I didn't know that. And then you start to realize wow, this is really bad. I didn't know that any of this was happening. How did I not know this wasn't happening? And what's happening here? You have a whole entire, thing you go through. So I want to talk a little bit about the his story, right? History that led us to this place. So let's begin. Now that we've gone through, I just wanted to make sure we had a conversation about what we're going to discuss today, so people understood. You know that our headline is right-wing extremism is causing havoc there, and it's true of both sides, right? These are groups that are just reactionary towards each other. Obviously, the biggest problem here is the fact that the occupation has not been dealt with. It's the fact that these folks had their land taken from them. They were pushed into a very tiny part of land called Gaza, and they've been living there wanting a right of return ever since. So obviously, without addressing that, there's not going to be an end to this conflict. But I want to go back further and talk about how we got here, right? So many have heard of the Balfour Agreement, right? This is something everybody's heard of. This is post-Great Britain colonialism. They're, exiting their colonies. All kinds of things are going on. Up until that point, Zionism was not a political philosophy that was widely accepted in the Jewish community. It wasn't. It was not popular. But part of what allowed it to become popular was the fact, and we all need to address this internationally, was the fact that many Jewish survivors of the Holocaust could not find refuge anywhere, including the United States. The United States left a ship of Jewish refugees out in the ocean, wouldn't accept them onto their soil, and the same can be said of many other countries. So what did they all decide to do? Well, let's deal with the JQ by creating a PQ. And I mean that to be, sort of like shocking, because it sort of is what happened, right? We don't want to take these Jewish survivors in. What do we do with them? Well, let's just give them this land here, even though it's not ours to give away. And if shit goes south, that's not our problem. We've dealt with it, right? And I kind of think that attitude was kind of ground zero for things just becoming more extreme and reactionary from there. So, and also I want to mention for folks that don't know, the Irgun and the Haganah, these were both historical Jewish terrorist groups that cleared the land from the natives and pushed them out of their villages. You can look into this history. I'm not making this up. This is a thing. So that is the birthplace, right? This is how this started. And now we find ourselves, decades and decades and decades later, not having adequately or in any just manner dealt with this. And it is absolutely inconceivable that we allow a colonial state to carry on without any justice given to those that lost their homes, their land, everything else.
Yeah. And we finance them to the tune of billions of dollars every year.
Right. Let's talk about that for a second. I digress. Biden's speech, I have no words. I legitimately have no words. $100 billion he's now asking for with no question of whether that's a good idea.
And to call for a ceasefire is like, shows that you're pro-Hamas in this country.
That's insane. No, it doesn't.
Insanity.
This is like my Jewish uncle is drunk as fuck and he's asking me for the car keys to go out and drive his car around town. Yeah. And I'm like, sure, bro, no problem.
Yeah. Well, because at this point, there's two solutions. There's stop the occupation and invest heavily in humanitarian effort and have this whole territory be overseen by some sort of international group that enforces a true democracy, right? Or, and this is what it seems Israel wants to do with the help of the U.S., is just completely decimate, and it's the second Nakba, right? Like get rid of all of the Palestinians.
Well, the right wing in Israel has been wanting to do that for a long time. They have used genocidal language for decades. People are familiar with Likud because that is what the party that Bibi's a member of. But what if I told you that there are even more nationalistic parties in Israel that are far more to the right than Likud is? Right. I'm thinking of Home Party, for example, that is the party of the settlers, which we're gonna talk about this in a second too. So my goal going through this is to just educate folks too a lot and give you information on stuff that you might not know, right? That might lead you to maybe kind of considering some more nuance in this conversation. So the first clip, number one, I want to point out, Amy Goodman on Democracy Now! Has been doing stellar coverage of this conflict from day one. She has had some of the best guests I've seen, and they have taken a range from being on all sides of the spectrum, obviously not the genocidal spectrum, but all of the legitimate sides of the spectrum, right? So I want to start by playing this clip from Amira Haas. Amira, actually, she's Israeli and she's Jewish. She grew up there. She lived in Gaza for a couple of decades. She's a journalist with Haaretz. Has been reporting on this conflict for a long time. So I want to play a little bit of what she had to say about the history of how the right wing in Israel has been taking over and commanding the conversation.
Can be appalled by what happened on Saturday, October the 7th, and at the same time say it is not history did not begin with October 7. People who grieve and are pained by what is happening, and I feel that every word that I say is hollow because it's not enough. The words that I need do not exist in our dictionaries to describe the horror that my friends in Gaza now go through. And we are here, and yes, we gather and we meet and we talk again, and we come on our TV programs, but we don't reach the main people. We don't reach the as Dr. Mustafa said, we don't reach the American leaders who are the only ones who could force Israel to stop this carnage now. And we don't reach Western countries who could also put some pressure, and we don't reach the Israeli public that is so drunk with the will to take revenge of what happened on October 7th that does not even know one detail, and even if it knew one detail about Gaza, it doesn't care because it just wants a revenge. But revenge, I think, is not enough to explain what is happening. The Israeli government is carrying on the political program of the extreme fascist, messianic, religious, right-wing, settler right-wing party led by Bezalel Smotrich, who already in 2017 said that he has a plan for Palestinians. They have three options, he told the Palestinians. You either give in and accept that you will never have a state, you'll never be free, you'll never have your right for self-determination materialized, and then you can live as fifth grade, sixth grade, whatever individuals in this in Israel. The second option for you is to emigrate. As we call sometimes by transfer, by willful transfer, expulsion by consent. And the third option, if you don't agree to give in, and if you don't agree to emigrate, and you resist, the Israeli army will know what to do with you. And this is what is happening now, both in Gaza and the West Bank. Israel is carrying out the plan, the political plan of this extreme fascist settlers colonizing right wing. This is, for years, people on the Israeli left have been warning about the brutalization if things continue, the brutalization that might come to a place of no return. And I never thought that I always hoped that when I warned about the danger of brutalization, the possibility of brutalization, that this warning would work, that we will not reach it. And I'm so afraid to say now that we reach it, that we've reached it, and the world and the Western world is appallingly doesn't intervene to stop it. You know, I was at the demonstration yesterday and I cried. Maybe I hold myself not to cry all these terrible days, not much, only sometimes, but I cried when some people spoke about their grandparents, Holocaust survivors, And I felt I was there also to represent my dead parents who are Holocaust survivors in this, call to the world to, how can they stand on the side and do nothing to stop this terrible slaughter? I cannot bear myself talking here safely in New York while I know what 2 million people, more than 2 million people are going through. And nothing can justify what is being, what Israel, what my tax money is causing right now. I don't know if my tax money is now the behind the missile that might kill one of my good friends, loved friends in Gaza.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know every time I've heard this 3 or 4 times now, and it brings tears to my eyes because she's not wrong. And interestingly enough, the only reason she isn't in Gaza right now is because she's in New York for something else, and she happened to have left Gaza before any of this had happened. It was just timing. I also want to mention I had Ronnie Barkin as somebody that I had interviewed 3 or 4 years ago here on Status Coup. I recommend that folks want more stuff that we just can't get in today. Want more of a lengthy conversation on some of the ins and outs of what the Israeli government is doing. Ronnie is also an Israeli citizen. He's Jewish, lives there in Israel, but he's a Palestinian rights guy. But I had it was like 3.5, 4 hours long conversation. You can look it up on Status Coup. Maybe Colin can find it and drop it in the chat. But if you're looking for more information, this would be a good place to start. He is knowledgeable, obviously. He grew up there. He knows all the ins and outs, and he does not mince words. Even I have moments where I'm like, oh, did he just say that?
Yeah.
All right. So having said that, a lot of what she's talking about here is how right-wing extremism has taken over the government there and that is being driven by the settlers. So I want to talk a little bit about that so people understand what we're saying here. So if we go back in time, there was a time when these two factions could have made peace, even given the fact that Palestinians lost homes. Many of them were willing to come to the table, accept divided territories, and set up their own Palestinian state separately. This was all very much possible, but what happened was the opposite, and it's just been reactionary past that point of time. There is a great book written by Miko Palad, who is the son of one of the original Zionist generals. It's called The General's Son, in fact, that discusses this entire period of time and his thoughts on it. He has come to the place where he's not a Zionist now at all, not even a liberal one. But I think historically speaking, he discusses a lot of, his dad was in those rooms and his dad was imploring them, we must make peace with the natives. If we don't, we're never going to have security. And obviously that's truthful.
Yeah.
But what's happened instead is you've had an ever-increasing cycle of fascism, right-wing, theocratical sort of beliefs take over, and it's being driven by the settler movement. So now we're focused on areas of the West Bank, right? So this is Hebron, Ramallah, East Jerusalem. So there's been an ever expansion of these illegal settlements, and they are absolutely illegal. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. They should not be there, but they are there. They're growing. The IDF is often involved with protecting the settlers and they're also involved with protecting them when they're doing atrocious things against the native Palestinians there. They will go on attack and harm them. There's been murders. I think the statistics for this year is 1 Palestinian per day, which is insane. That doesn't get reported on at all. In Gaza, I think we have to mention historically that there were also illegal settlements in Gaza at one time, but those were abandoned. There was supposed to be a separate Palestinian state at that time set up in Gaza. That didn't happen, but the settlements were abandoned and dismantled. That should have happened in the West Bank as well. That didn't happen. So again, it's this right-wing extremist viewpoints that have been just taking over.
And part of, they were saying that part of the reason that there wasn't more military presence to protect the innocents in Gaza was because
they're all in the West Bank,
protecting the people who were stealing other people's homes and burning down their olive gardens, and so priorities.
And that is a verified fact of the matter. So they had moved a lot of the IDF troops into the West Bank because, again, this government, this coalition that we're seeing right now is comprised of a lot of right-wing settler movement folks, right?
Yes.
Bibi isn't the most extreme in there. There's another guy in there that was literally kicked out of the government previously because he called for genocide, and the court said you cannot serve in the Knesset. This is this is a fact of the matter. So this is, but let's bring him back and put him in the government.
And now they just kicked out somebody on the left from the Knesset, right?
Right, and we're going to talk about that in a second. They have suspended a lefty. You're correct. Okay. The next clip I want to play.
Sorry, can I just say one quick thing?
Yes, you can say whatever you want.
Okay. My grandfather did a lot of work after World War II, relocating Jews after the war, because as you said, the U.S. didn't want them, even during the war, turned boatloads back who would then go to be exterminated, while the U.S. was bringing in Nazis and
under Operation Paperclip. Yeah, you're right.
And as you said, there was no place for them to go. He did a lot of work in South America, some in Eastern Europe and in Israel. And so he went from being, like, in the 1920s, a communist who stood on a literal soapbox in Times Square to going very hard right, because I think a lot of Jews, especially who were alive during World War II, the never again, and that's why this becomes so complicated, because Jews, of course, have historically been persecuted, and the Holocaust isn't that long ago. But
they're still being persecuted. I mean,
yes.
But part of me thinks that is being weaponized, though, to justify what's going on, and that's also extremely problematic.
It is grotesque that they are using the Holocaust as cover, the Netanyahu government as cover to justify their own genocide. And, when we say never again, it's not just against Jews. It's never again should we allow a genocide to happen. And even my grandfather in the 90s started saying what's happening in Israel is a horror. And even if you're only looking at your situation selfishly, it's bad for the Jews, because this will only instigate more anti-Semitism.
I think you're correct on that. It will lead to more, definitely. All right, so I want to move now to Human Rights Watch. This individual is also an Israeli Jewish individual that works for Human Rights Watch. I can't get that out. And she's talking about what the settlers have been doing in the West Bank and how that's contributing to this mess. Let's play that one, Colin.
Thank you. And I'm sorry to say that since October 7th in Gaza, Israeli airstrikes have killed on average 100 children a day. And that's the statistic that stays with me. So this latest escalation began on October 7th when Hamas-led fighters entered Israel and committed unspeakable war crimes against Israeli civilians. They massacred partygoers at an outdoor dance party. They entered homes, in some cases burning the homes, in other cases shooting families, and they took hostage men, women, older people, children, people with disabilities. Appropriately, the U.S. government and people in the United States condemned those acts because they were unspeakable crimes against civilians that have no justification. So the answer cannot be for the Israeli government, with the backing of the American government, to then target and harm civilians in Gaza. I'm particularly concerned about the collective punishment of civilians in Gaza. The Israeli military cut food, electricity, water, and fuel supplies on October 7th, which is contributing to the humanitarian catastrophe. And the Israeli military is engaging is dropping explosive weapons in densely populated areas with wide area effects. So when you do that, when you drop bombs on crowded urban centers, it is predictable that you will kill civilians. It is predictable that you will kill children. And that's what's happening. Gaza is about the size of the U.S. city of Philadelphia. It's 2.2 million people. Nearly half of those people are children. And that's something that we need to see more of the United States government addressing. We've heard thus far general comments about the need to respect international humanitarian law. We need very specific directives for the Israeli government to immediately restore food, fuel, electricity, and water supplies, and to stop dropping weapons in densely populated civilian areas.
Yeah, and someone's bringing up white phosphorus. I think it's Holly in the chat, and yeah, they dropped some white phosphorus, which is again completely an indefensible thing to do. I want to address that statistic about the amount of children that have been killed. The reason for this, and I don't know if folks know this, is about 50% of the population in Gaza is actually children. I think you mentioned this at the start of the show, Leila, but it's folks under 18. That's why that statistic is so high. But again, there's been retaliation happening now also in the West Bank. That's just been upping the ante for years now, honestly, for years. And it's gotten to the point now that I don't think anybody that has been following this conflict and has a rational mind about it can argue that there's a two-state solution possible at this point. I don't think it's possible. I think that ship sailed. So really, for me, the ultimate thing that needs to be addressed is, how do we give some of these Palestinians the right of return to their homes? And how do we share the land in a democracy that's fully grown up, that has equality for all? So, the right wing in Israel, their response to that is, generally speaking, that if we do that, we lose the Jewishness of our state. We lose the character of who we are. The reason we're a Jewish state is because we need a protective spot in the world where we don't have to suffer anti-Semitism, pogroms. And these are all very valid concerns and fears. Anti-Semitism is growing in the world. I don't think that's up for debate. But I also don't think you achieve security by doing what you're doing now, and you can't make decisions based on fear in that way. I think it's just time to grow up and take a collective breath and realize that, yes, there's going to be some domestic terrorism within the state, and that should be dealt with the way you would deal with a domestic terrorist, as crime, not as collective punishment. Right. Exactly.
Right. And, the thing of the right of return. So, Jews are allowed to come, even if you're a Brooklyn Jew and you just feel like taking over somebody's home, but not if you're Black, not if you're an Ethiopian Jew.
Right.
Right. No, so it's also a white supremacist state. And then the other thing is, not if you speak out against their policies. Norman Finkelstein is banned from Israel. Right. Yeah. So his parents were Holocaust survivors and he's critical of their genocide, banned. So that's also a fallacy. It's only certain kind. I mean, all my life I've been accused by sort of more conservative Jews of not being a real Jew, so they're even that, it's I don't know, I would have been hauled off to the ovens just like all of you, but that's not really the concern. The concern isn't to protect all Jews. That's not what it is. So yeah, it has to be a one-state solution with an oversight by an international group that makes sure, because Palestinians have been, their land has been taken away to two little slivers, right? So there has to be an international effort, and the U.S. keeps blocking any resolutions by the U.S.
Which is insane. I can't believe they blocked a ceasefire. Really? What?
Yeah.
Ceasefires are bad now? What are you saying with that? That actually was shocking to me. I'm like, wow, that's
yeah.
Holy shit. That's where we're at. Okay. I hear what you're saying there. So there is a lot of racism within the state as well. What you're saying is not untrue. A lot of the settlers are European. Many are Russian. And they come and many are from the America, let's be honest. And they come and they take this land away and they think they're entitled to it because they've been told that they're entitled to it based on some biblical, not even a Torah passage, some biblical passage. Because please make this make sense.
Yeah.
I don't really understand it.
Yeah.
I'm sure you've had these conversations too, and it just kind of goes in circles. You're like,
well, because you can't be rational about it, right?
Right.
It's not irrational. It's this guy daddy said it in a book, and that's going to be I'm going to hold on to that while I destroy people's.
Right. And so this is messianic is what they would call that. Yes. And then on the same token, let me bring up one more group because there's so many involved and having opinions on this. There's groups like the Real Torah Jews and whatnot. These are Orthodox. So these are also deeply religious Jewish folks that believe that the state of Israel is an abomination because it isn't what the Torah says. The Torah says basically that that Jewish folks aren't supposed to have a homeland. So there's, again, no group is monolithic, and it's helpful to try to understand all of these groups involved and look at their opinions. All right, let's turn now to, you had mentioned earlier the Knesset lefty that had been suspended for speaking truth on this matter. I want to bring this up. So, and again, I find myself pulling Democracy Now! Clips all week because Amy Goodman's really the only one like doing any deep dive into any of this, which is really unfortunate.
Yeah.
All right. So an Israeli ethics committee has suspended Knesset member Ofer Kassif for 45 days after Kassif criticized Israel's assault on Gaza. His suspension comes as Israeli authorities have arrested more than 100 Israeli citizens over social media posts supporting Palestinians in Gaza. Wrap your head around this for a second, folks. Have arrested more than 100 Israeli citizens over social media posts. Israel, I'm sorry, I'm going to say this and I'm going to get slammed for it maybe a little bit, is not a democracy.
No.
They don't have a First Amendment right to protection. The IDF monitors journalists, what they say and do, by the way. That's something Ronnie Barkin discussed with me in his interview. At least 70 Israeli university students face suspension or other disciplinary action for posting pro-Palestinian sentiments online. Now, mind you, none of these things or these posts that these folks are saying condone what Hamas did. Like, I need to be clear on this. I need people to understand this.
Right.
Because you're saying we shouldn't do collective punishment in Gaza doesn't mean you're okay with what Hamas did. These things are not one or the other, right? There's no mutual exclusivity here. So these are people that just are not on board. And I think this group is growing and growing as far as I can tell. They're not on board with where this is headed, right?
Right.
And I would like to remind people another thing. Many of the Israeli Jews that live there now were born into this country. They're not part of the settler movement, right? They're the same as me or you. I was born here in the United States. In a sense, our country is obviously 200 years, so it's longer. But I wasn't chosen to be born in America, which is also a colonial state, is it not? Yeah. So am I seeing the problem of that? Of course I am. Do I talk about it? Yes, I am, because I'm afforded a First Amendment right to do so in this country. But I'd like people to try to imagine that inside the state of Israel, there's also a growing body of individuals that are fighting against this. That see the fascism for what it is and aren't okay with it. Some of them leave the country. I know I have many Israeli friends that live here now and have no intention of ever going back because they think it's been overrun with right-wing fascists. This is, I got, maybe I should interview some of these folks online if they would be willing to do so. But it's complex. It's complicated.
Yeah. But they arrested 300 Jewish protesters in front of the Capitol in the U.S. I think a
couple of rabbis as well, like
a couple rabbis, yeah. And I mean, just speaking of like democracy, excuse me, there have been law students who have been sort of publicly outed by their law school professors at Harvard, and their notices of being hired have been rescinded because they've been, again, pro-Palestine, not pro-Hamas.
Or just pro-Palestinian rights even. So, the unfortunate reality is there's a Hebrew word called haspara, which I feel needs a definition. I know you know what that is, but let me explain that to everybody else. Haspara, this is Israeli propaganda. So this is the idea, like, if we can, one of the things they do, there's many, I'm not going to discuss all of them, but one of the things they've done, and they've done so effectively, is that we're going to marry Zionism with Judaism. We're going to say that these are the same things, and that if you criticize Zionism, then you're being anti-Semitic. Obviously, that's totally bullshit.
Right.
That's like saying, I have a problem with my American government. I'm going to criticize it. And if I do so, then I'm un-American and I should be thrown in jail. Are you serious? Are you serious? No. This has been bad. It's been a bad idea. I think it's also helped to create more anti-Semitism.
Absolutely. And there's so much of it, so many things that we find out in the Hasbara is like things that they've accused Palestinians of doing. And then you see, I think even like B'Tselem and Human Rights Watch, the idea that Palestinians use, or Hamas uses, children as shields.
Right. That is Hasbara,
entirely discredited, and yet that is what the IDF does. The beheaded babies. That was repeated and repeated. That Bush, what's his name? Biden said that he saw.
There's been carte blanche reporting.
Nothing. And but that's in people's heads, and so then it's dehumanizing, right? Like, oh, Palestinians. Right. But then I have seen more video and actual documentation of Palestinian babies having been beheaded this past week. So again, they accuse their enemy of what they are doing. I mean, it is it's evil what they have been doing, and it's been going on for decades. Yeah.
I want to turn now to Aliat Shakid, who is She's the new justice minister that has been appointed by Netanyahu. I pulled this particular one out of the hat because it's somebody I've been familiar with. She's definitely part of the settler movement, very, very right wing. She headed up the Home Party, which is an ultra nationalist group. I don't know how else you would call it. This is reporting from Mondovice. This is a lefty Jewish publication that monitors the Israel-Gaza war and has war, not war, the conflict from many, many decades now.
Right.
All right. So Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu decided to appoint Alyat Shaked as the justice minister in his fourth government. Shaked is a member of the Knesset representing the far right, Habayet Yahudi. I can never say that properly,
yeah.
which translates into Home Party. She is known for her extreme ultra nationalist views. During Israel's summer of 2014 attack on Gaza, she essentially called for the genocide of Palestinians in a Facebook post on July 1st, a day before the Israeli extremists kidnapped Palestinian teenager Mohammed Abu Khadr and burned him alive. This actually did happen. The lawmaker asserted that the entire Palestinian people is the enemy and called for its destruction. I want to point something out here. If you say they're all our enemy, or you'll see them say they're all terrorists, then it sort of justifies any collective punishment. There's no longer collective punishment, right? If every person living in Gaza is part of Hamas, right, that's not collective punishment against civilians. They're all terrorists, right? So that's kind of why I think they use this sort of language. Including its elderly and its women, its cities and its villages, its property and its infrastructure. Her post consisted of an excerpt from the article by Yuri Elazur, the late right-wing journalist and leader of the Israeli settler movement, which seeks to colonize Palestinian land in contravention of international law. So I want to scroll down and just read some of this post so folks can have an idea of how these folks think. The Palestinian people has declared war on us, and we must respond with war, not an operation, not a slow-moving one, not low intensity, not controlled escalation, no destruction of terror infrastructure, no targeted killings. Enough with the oblique references. This is a war. Words have meanings. This is a war. It is not a war against terror, and not a war against extremists, and not even a war against the Palestinian Authority. These two are forms of avoiding reality. This is a war between two people. Who is the enemy? The Palestinian people. Why? Ask them. They started. Okay. They didn't start this. That's not true. I don't understand how they could say they started this. You came in there and you took away all their land, destroyed their villages.
There's also such a romanticization of I
don't understand this. That's just a fact. That's a fact.
How do you want people to uprise against being killed and slaughtered and having their land stolen? It's not going to happen peacefully. They tried it with the unarmed, peaceful march, their right of return, and IDF soldiers just killed them. You're talking
about 2018?
Yeah, in 2018. Yeah. I think there was an Arab Initiative for Peace in 2004, and that was rejected. I think. So what happens? I was listening to Norman Finkelstein the other day, and he was talking about, Nat Turner's slave revolt. They killed white people. That was that's going to happen. It doesn't happen necessarily peacefully, and I'm not justifying it. And I would feel terrible. Of course, no innocent life should be taken, but the conditions have been created by people like this member of Knesset who says, "You are all our enemy." Well, so then how does this ever get resolved? You've left people no choice.
That's right. This is why I say the real problem in this conflict is right-wing extremism. It's ultranationalism, it's theocracy, it's authoritarianism, and it exists both within Hamas and the Israeli Knesset at this point. So it has for a long time. So this has just been it's just been amping up. In fact, we will talk about Fatah in about 15 minutes as soon as I get, because I think we do need to discuss this. Yeah. There was a separate secular Palestinian group prior to Hamas that, and I think it's important that we mention that they're secular because a lot of Palestinians are not Muslim, they're Christian.
Right.
Okay. Anyway, you get an idea of where this is going. I don't think we need to hear any more from her. Goodbye.
Yeah.
Goodbye. Good riddance. but I mean, when you grow up in such a toxic environment where you're constantly spoon-fed this ideology, this is what happens, right?
Right.
All right, so let's turn now to settler violence. This has been going on for decades. I think there was a time when the West Bank, where you could have argued for a two-state solution. I'm going to say 20, 30 years ago, that was possible. I just don't think that it is at this point. Also, let me mention, if people have questions or thoughts on this, I'd love to take them and chat with y'all. Super chats are open, or also ask Colin if you see anything interesting, pull it up on the screen so we can look at it. And please make sure that you share the live stream, piss off all your friends, because I think we've pissed off every group today.
Yay! Welcome their hatred.
I mean, having any sort of nuanced conversation on this is just going to piss everybody off. I've come to realize this in my old age, that that's just the case. It's unfortunate, because really this is what needs to happen. We need to all deal with reality here and how we best de-escalate from where we're at.
Exactly.
All right, so I pulled B'Tselem this is an Israeli rights organization that covers violence in the occupied West Bank. So they had a project where they gave cameras to the Palestinian folks that live there, Hebron, Ramallah, East Jerusalem, all of these different areas. They gave them cameras to film what was happening so they could start to really have proof of what was going on with the settlers there. And some of the video that came back is pretty damn horrifying, I have to be honest. So I picked up a handful of videos. Anybody that is interested in looking more at this stuff and seeing what's going on, B'Tselem has a B'Tselem. I can never say. My Hebrew is terrible. My Yiddish is better.
Okay.
So this first video is Israeli settlers who invaded Palestinian land, bully its owner, and attack him in front of soldiers. So there's a theme you're going to see here where obviously they're stealing more homes, in case that's not clear yet. Let me just start with that. The settlers are coming in and they're taking the Palestinian homes away little by little, or they're bulldozing their farmland and building up new structures. And the IDF has a watchful eye over all of this happening and does nothing to stop them for the most part. In many instances, helps the settlers. Right. So let's play this first one. This is just a prime example of what you see go on.
למה אתה מתקרב? היי! תתרחק ממני!
بدش ايدك
אתה רוצה לראות?
ما تحكي ممنوع تصير
אין לי בעיה, תהרוג אותי! הלו! זוז מהרכב! תעזוב את הרכב!
انت شو بدك بس افهم
הרכב שלי! זה אדמה שלי ואתה אל תתקרב!
انت جيب الشرطة خليها تقيم السيارة اما احنا ما غلطنا انا ساكن في الخليل وين بدك كنت ساكن هون ارضنا اشتريناها لا ما لنا يا حبيبي ارضنا اشتريناها ما لنا حقنا دفعنا عرق جبيننا يا حبيبي
ايش ما تعرف شيء الو قاعدين מתחילים לעשות בעיות עם האנשים גם פה
بيسووا مشاكل قاعدين
نسلم
تتدخل مالي تتدخلش فيه احكي شو بدك ما تمد ايدك انت جاي تمد ايدك ما الك هاي الشرطه جايه هيك بتشوف هلا بتشوف الفيديوزان اعتدت عليك ما له يمد ايده على السياره ما له قانونا يمد ايده على السياره لا معاه لا هو شرطي ولا هو جيش يمد ايده على السياره رخ الوراق ما لك في الوراق هدول يا زلمه هدول محمد ولا رخ الوراق
تعزف את הניירות تعزف
رخ الوراق ما تلعب في القرآن انت قاعدين بيسوي فيها ازعر قاعد
عزف את זה
ما تقعد تمد ايدك عليه ما تمد ايدك عليه ما فيش اي مشكله هم اللي اجوا اعتدوا علينا
הכל מצולם והכל מתועד סבבה תודה
כולם אחורה ما تسوي فيها ازعار
God. It's just vile to treat people that way. It's so dehumanizing.
It's
and they feel so
dehumanizing.
powerless. Like, what do you do when somebody is treating you like that with a gun and doing it really, truly to make you feel, to torture you? That's what it is.
Right. I mean, him grabbing the Quran, all that's just to bully him. That has no other meaning. I do want to point out something that Alice brought up, that Zionism and Judaism are not the same thing. We actually did say that earlier, but it bears repeating over and over again. They are not the same. And you are correct. There are many Israelis that are not Zionists at this point, that they want to have an actual democracy put in place. Again, you know, the thing that most Americans don't seem to understand is that no group is monolithic. There are a vast variance of beliefs within the Jewish community on this. If you ever want to see a massive fight break out, bring up Zionism and how people feel about it. Some of the biggest brawls I've seen within the Jewish community are over this. Yes. You're laughing because I'm sure you've seen the same thing happen. I've been called a capo a few times, which is traitor. But I think a lot of I would also say this, a lot of the different viewpoints are divided by age group, right? So our parents' generation were raised on Zionism, and Zionism was how Jews got safety. That was just, and I believed that for a very long time as well, until so a lot of this is just, you know, okay. Let's move on. The clip that you were about to play, Colin, let's go ahead and play that. This is a clip of the Home Party individuals. You're going to recognize a lot of crossover between what you're seeing in this, except just imagine this is the United States and it's a bunch of Trump flags. This is sort of the same thing. So these are the ultra-nationalist Home Party folks having a flag rally in East Jerusalem, which is part of the Palestinian, they're annexing it into Israel, but for a long time it was part of the West Bank, Palestinian occupied territory.
משהו לא חוקי אתה עושה. אתה נתת ליהודי עיתונאי להיכנס, ורק בגלל אני ערבי לא נתת לי להיכנס. תסתכל עלי עיתונאי, יש לי תעודת עיתונאי. רק בגלל אני ערבי אני לא יכול להיכנס. יאללה, לצאת מפה. אל תיגע בו, תוריד את היד. אל תיגע בו, אתה נגעת בו. תוריד את היד. ילדים לא לריב. לא תעש לגעת. הנה.
You know, I watched this and I've seen other video from that day. It's all terrible, but it really does it not feel like a Trump rally?
It does. And it's also, again, part of the Hasbara is everything we've been told about Arabs and Palestinians from Israeli government or Zionists. My whole life was death to Jews. They don't want Israel to exist. They treat us horribly. They're animals, barbaric, all this stuff. And then you see the way these people are acting. You know, I saw settlers urinating on dead bodies of Palestinians this past week. You know, all these things. It is just, it is dehumanizing to the people who are perpetrating the genocide also. How do you come back from how you treat people this way?
I agree. And to be fair, you will see also Palestinians that do say death to Jews, like all of that.
Of course,
But
yeah.
it is not a majority, and this is not collective. Again, there's within both of these groups
don't have
there is a
power.
wide range. They
Yeah.
don't. No, they don't. I agree with you there. That's the main difference here. But
Yeah.
having said that, I think there's a tendency for people to want to play team sports as opposed to understanding that within each of these communities, there's a wide range of belief systems and. At the end of the day, mainly it's innocent people that pay the cost of that, as is the case in most conflicts like this. Anyway, so I wanted to point out, just to give also people an idea of that. Let's turn now to the next B'Tselem video. This one is Israeli settler shoots and injures a Palestinian in the stomach. This is. Well, it's pretty self-explanatory. Let's just play it.
فسخوا الاخوات الشرموطة. كس اختك اخ واحد، كس اختك ولا يا ابن الزنا ولا يا اخو الشربوطة. يلا علي بتسلم. هينو يا مخابيل هينو عضغيانيم.
Yeah.
Sorry, but the hatred that Palestinians must feel, I would say justifiably, for people who are decimating them this way. I understand why any Jews would feel that for Nazis. And meanwhile, Netanyahu is like slowly whitewashing Hitler, saying that he didn't actually want to exterminate 6 million Jews. He's posing up to Bolsonaro, to right-wing anti-Semites.
I had forgotten that he said that. I'm still appalled by this. You're right.
So like that's where your hatred should be going.
I agree.
And that would be justifiable, right? The Warsaw Ghetto uprising.
Right.
You kill some Germans who are supporting the Nazis who are putting you in a pogrom. That's it's
that's
just
justice. That is just.
I mean, so right. So like the imbalance is so enormous.
It's enormous. It's not just. It's not healing the world.
And it's never going to get better. Like if you don't, the true solutions are what Netanyahu wants to do, his right-wing government, and just flatten them, or invest in rehabilitating relationships and show that we're not the terrorists, right? But otherwise, there's going to continue always having to feel that you're threatened if you're a Jew in Israel, because you've created groups of people who despise you because of the way you've treated them.
I'll tell you right now, if the only solution here is ending the occupation, and I know that is true.
100%.
If we weren't constantly increasing settlements, if we weren't supporting that as in the United States, we would not be in this place, right? So 100%, that is, I don't think that what I just said should be controversial, yet somehow it is.
And that's where the deep propaganda has to be fought against. But, they're not showing so much on the news, the millions of pro-peace, pro-Palestinian marches across the whole world. I do think, as you said, generationally, the tide is turning, but I mean, there's so much carnage happening in the meantime, but
right. Right. I mean, we had a march here in LA. I don't know if you attended. I couldn't go because of other work obligations, but I went a few years ago. Jewish Voice for Peace has a very robust membership here, and there were a ton of Jewish folks out there, basically. And I remember talking to some Palestinians, and they were just crying because they're like, we never thought we'd see the day that people would understand us, support us, and that our Jewish friends would hear our cries. And I'm like, well, but anybody that's looking for justice in the world sees this for what it is, right? You can't. why should I collectively punish Palestinians for what the Nazi Germans did to my grandfather and great grandparents? It's not their fault.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's not healing the world, right? It's warped. It is. Okay. I think I have one more. I'm going to sort of torture you guys with one more video. Actually, two more. Apologies. I think it's important for folks to see this stuff. I do. And they're only 2 minutes each, so they're not like hours and hours of it. So let's play the next one. Colin, please.
الغاز على الموازي المواطنين مباشرة. ما زالوا بحماية الجيش.
والله شايفك بقول لك انزل على الجبل قرابه دير باله شباب الغاز البضربه رجعوها رجعوها
الجيش برفقة المستوطنين.
So imagine, if you will, that this is daily life here in the West Bank. That is happening on the daily. If you think I'm crazy, please go look up B'Tselem's website and you will see thousands and thousands and thousands of these videos. It's crazy. And we've got one more. Let's just play that. I do want to bring up, was it Holly that brought up the Notori Karda? Yes, that's another group. They're like the true Torah Jews. There's a bunch of different Orthodox Jewish organizations that are against this because they don't. And basically their theology is that the Jewish people are not supposed to have a homeland, which is why a lot of them refer, and also so do secular Jews, refer to these individuals as messianic, because, you know, this is coming from Christianity, kind of biblical stuff. We talk about that this being the Jewish homeland in the Bible, not the Torah. So let's be clear on that. So I mean, as if we need more layers to this onion, but I did want to address what she was saying in the chat. So for folks that don't know who or what that's about, that's pretty much what it's about. Unless you have something to add.
It's like the second coming. I mean, that's what right-wing Christians in the U.S. are
100%.
supporting.
Evangelicals will support Israel no matter what for this reason alone. Even, and oddly, what's odd to me about that is many of the Palestinians are Christians, right? That's, for decades, that's been a thing. Like, this is, Palestine was never only Muslims. This idea that all Palestinians are Muslim is false.
Right, but they're not white.
Right.
And that's, I think that's what feeds into it, just like Ethiopian Jews are not welcome.
Right.
They don't have a right to return. They don't have a birthright to Israel, which.
No, and you're not wrong on this. You're not wrong on this. Okay, so let's play the last settler video, if we can.
Unprovoked.
Unprovoked. Again, the goal here, just so folks get this into their brains, and I'm sure they do already at this point. The goal here is to chase the Palestinians away and take over their properties. That's the ultimate goal. And you know what? I lied. I do have one more, and I do want to play it. This is Hebron. So the West Bank is divided into multiple security sections. Hebron is in a ultra security section. That's not what they call it. I'm just kind of trying to put language around it. So there's checkpoints there. You can absolutely spend trying to get through multiple of these checkpoints. If you live in Hebron and you work in a different part of the West Bank, you can spend 6-7 hours going through checkpoints. I'm not exaggerating. So there's often conflicts that arise at the checkpoints. So this is an example of that.
ما هو عبيان؟ لا قلت غني فوق. قاعد انظر ما. يلا ما عشان برجعني الدين ما هو عشان برجعني عشان برجعني. عشان برجعني. عشان برجعني. قريب على الحاجز شباب شارع السعودية على المحسوس في مشكلة على الحاجز.
صور في المستوطنين انا مش فيه
سويات كل واحد يعتدوا عليه وجنبه. تعال موسى تعال سويات. تعال عدي انت وياه يلا عدوا.
قولوا يفتح اسمع قولوا يا اخي افتح لنا افتح لنا تعالي
So I have to give kudos where kudos is due. Props to this particular soldier for not letting the settler beat the shit out of this guy and his 2 kids, and for keeping him at bay as they were trying to walk to wherever they're going, home, wherever, not else. But this happens on the daily. How does this make sense? For me, I watch these videos and I'm just dumbfounded, fucking, pardon my French, dumbfounded how any of these Jewish settlers can behave in this way. Like, how do you take a stick out and decide you're going to beat the shit out of somebody that you don't even know, given our collective history of pogroms, the Holocaust, like how?
Yep. And the way,
this is right-wing extremism. That's why I'm saying the enemy here isn't the Jewish people, isn't the Palestinian people, isn't the Israelis, the Gazans, isn't the Muslims, whatever. It's the right-wing extremism that has just completely crept over the entire, this ultra-nationalism, theocracy.
The ideology that dehumanizes a whole group of people, right?
Yeah. And it's not, thank God not every member has caught this virus, but it is... It's fucking devastating.
Well, it spreads. Also, the violence is cyclical, right? So if you are a Jewish person in Israel and your government has pushed people to such desperate times that they're going to, lob a rocket in and it kills a friend, that
it's reactionary.
Hatred, right? Yeah, and so but then it just keeps going, and there's nobody ever to step back. And all this talk about Israel has a right to defend itself. Do Palestinians not have that right?
Yes, of course they do. And it kills me a lot of the times when they say that this is also Hospira, right? A lot of times when they say this, they're not even talking about self-defense. They're talking about being the aggressor.
100%.
I mean, when they said, I'm like, yeah, but right now they're being the aggressor. That sounds ludicrous to me. Like, but nobody questions. Like, you just see like CNN, Israel did nothing wrong. They have the right to defend themselves. I mean, that's not even close to reality. Honestly, the mainstream media in the United States is part of the problem, and they should be ashamed at some of their reporting. If you really want to get better reporting, other than I'd say Democracy Now! On this, you have to go to the BBC or, elsewhere where they're not, where they're willing to actually discuss these things. It's crazy. Okay, so I want to turn now because, of course, this happened, and I want folks to remember that this happened. Let's pull up Golan Heights. Israel unveils, wait for it, Trump Heights settlement. Oh my God. I am going to bring back an oldie but goodie from a couple of years ago. I want to point something out here. The Golan Heights, we're no longer even in the West Bank. This is occupied Syria, just so we're all clear on that. It's not just Palestine that's been occupied. So Donald Trump decided that he was going to have his own settlement named Trump Heights in the Golan Heights. Let's scroll down to this photo, or did we already look at this photo? Because it's fucking unbelievable. Yeah, that photo. I mean, good Lord.
I mean, what?
It's cringe. It's All right. Israel PM Benjamin Netanyahu has unveiled a new settlement in the occupied Golan Heights named after U.S. President Donald Trump. At a naming ceremony on Sunday, Mr. Netanyahu said Trump Heights honored Mr. Trump for his decision to recognize, wait for it, Israeli sovereignty over the territory. Jeez. I mean, so Donald Trump gets to decide what the borders are now between two nations? Are you fucking kidding me? This is the apex of right-wing extremism right here, folks. Building work has yet to begin, but a sign bearing Mr. Trump's name and U.S. and Israeli flags was unveiled. Critics called the move a publicity stunt with no legal authority. Well, duh. There's clearly no legal authority here, but that doesn't. When has that ever stopped any of these lunatics? Anyway, I wanted to remind folks of that. So, and now I want to talk about Biden because right-wing insanity, you've heard me say this before, I'm going to say it again, right-wing insanity isn't just for the Republicans. And in fact, there are some Democrats that are more diseased with right-wing insanity than some of the Republicans are. That's just kind of a weird fact of the matter.
I'm sure Biden will get his own plaque soon.
He should. I want to play this clip from Mustafa Baghati where he's talking about how Biden is repeatedly just taking lies and spitting them out as truth, and that this allows, this is the problem here, this allows groups like CNN to sort of protect themselves from reporting wrong facts. So now instead of saying Israel, blah, 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 they're saying Biden says Israel, blah, blah, blah. Right. Even if what follows is untrue, it doesn't matter, right? CNN's not saying it. The president is. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Let's go ahead and play this clip.
What did President Biden do? Instead of coming here and telling the Israelis, and he knows very well that the United States is the only country in the world that has leverage over Israel. Instead of telling them, stop this atrocity, have ceasefire, so that you can at least save the prisoners that are in Gaza, the Israeli prisoners. He came here to be totally complicit with Israeli war crimes and to push the United States into becoming a participant in these war crimes by sending soldiers to participate in Israeli invasion and in the crimes that are committed against the Palestinian people. He bought every lie that Netanyahu told him, and he kept repeating them. And I don't understand how the American intelligence structures don't tell their president that these are lies. I am sure they know that. The first lie about decapitating children, it turned out to be a big lie. The other lie about raping women, it turned out to be a lie, and that's what Los Angeles Times apologized about. Then this huge lie about Palestinians killing themselves in their hospital. This huge lie that Israel distributed and the Israeli military did, as they usually do, by telling series of lies and changing them one time after the other. Before I come back to President Biden, let me explain. Israel committed a terrible airstrike on the Baptist hospital run by the Anglican Church, killing no less than 473 Palestinian people, mainly children and women, and injuring more than 300 others. Why? For what? It was all about the Israeli ultimatum that was already, according to WHO, sent to no less than 27 hospitals, including the largest hospital in Gaza, Shifa Hospital, to evict and evacuate so that Israel can conduct its ethnic cleansing of big parts of Gaza at the moment, with a plan of ethnically cleansing all of Gaza Strip.
All of this is correct. The LA Times absolutely did, in case folks don't know this, they absolutely did have to retract a story because it turned out it was false. Yep. I do want to talk about the bombed church for a minute. We don't know for certain who is responsible for that. We know
Are you know the hospital or the church?
Oh, sorry. The hospital. You're right.
You're, okay. Yeah.
No, thank you for saying that. My brain.
No, same. Yeah.
We do have this going on. Arik Toler, who is a fabulous investigative journalist, they did point, okay, so the IDF, the State of Israel, and then the UN ambassador, United States accounts, multiple accounts put out this video saying that this was proof that the bombing was done by Hamas and not the IDF. Well, it turned out that the timestamps did not match on those videos. Arik Toler, who writes for Bellingcat, is the first one that pointed that out after investigating. So they all, this is what kills me. They all took the video down because it was obviously false. And then they just put up the same rhetoric without video. So it was just the text that appeared after that. I'm like, yeah, man, you guys have no shame. So, but then Biden repeated it, right? So I would say, in my experience, the IDF does lie quite a bit. They killed a Palestinian journalist. They denied it. They blamed the Palestinians. They finally had to retract all that and admit that they had shot this journalist after about a year of back and forth. Yes. Yeah. So there's a history of that there. So would my tendency is to think like, yeah, the IDF probably did kill or did bomb the hospital. They had bombed that same hospital a few days earlier. It would not be out of character for them to do this.
And they bombed 21 other ones. But also, it was
I don't know why this particular one became such a hot point, though, I guess.
I know. And the crazy thing is, right away, Netanyahu's social communicating director, Hanania Naftali, took credit for it and said, "This is what we."
And then deleted the tweet. Yeah.
And then deleted it. And, it was sort of interesting because there was the, if it had been when they thought that the hospital had been demolished, when we all thought, the only rocket or the only sort of military power that could do that sort of damage would have been coming from the IDF.
I had that same thought at first when they said that. I'm like, I know Hamas has rockets, but do they have one that is big enough to do that sort of damage from? I don't think that they do. Maybe I'm wrong, but yeah, I hear what you're saying.
Said no. And then the next morning, there was video released that actually the hospital wasn't damaged. It was the parking lot that had been destroyed, and it didn't have that same sort of crater that would have been created by a huge bomb like from the IDF. But there were still hundreds of people who were killed because they had been evacuated and told to evacuate and go to the safety of a hospital. So yes, in the fog of war,
they were parking out there. Yeah,
possibly, but also, does it matter? Like, as you said, Israel had already bombed 21 other hospitals. They had already bombed this hospital just a couple of days before that. So I don't know. This feels like people are focusing on this one possible issue, whereas the damage is still done.
I agree.
Civilians shouldn't have been evacuated in the first place.
I agree. I don't know why this is a focus. I guess my broader discussion here is that this is how misinformation spreads, or is intentionally, in many cases, intentionally misspread.
Yes.
The fact that Biden just repeats the stuff without even consideration is really disturbing to me. I have to say that I have a whole nother level of disrespect for Joe Biden after this past week. I'm saying it publicly and I'm saying it out loud. I just cannot fathom how poorly he has handled the situation.
I did not think it could go any lower, and yet somehow
it managed to. Yeah. So I actually had a thing of the LA Times. I think we've discussed that enough just because we've been on for an hour and a half almost now. So let's move on. You guys get the point there on the misinformation. I do want to discuss Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders blocks ban on U.S. aid to Gaza. So they were trying to ban aid to Gaza in Congress. And Bernie Sanders is like, yeah, I'm not down with that. I love that the Jewish guy in Congress is the one that's being like, are you kidding me right now?
Yeah, and then not a Democrat. Then not a Democrat. Jewish
right. So in Washington, D.C., Vermont Independent Senator Bernie Sanders has blocked legislation that would have effectively banned U.S. humanitarian aid from reaching Gaza. On Wednesday, Sanders objected when Florida Republican Senator Rick Scott tried to pass the so-called Stop Taxpayer Funding of Hamas Act. Like, this is not funding Hamas. These people have no goddamn food and water. They are dying. They are starving to death. Are you kidding me? How
doctors are drinking saline bags because there's no water. People are drinking seawater.
Yes. So folks know there's a desalination plant there in Gaza that is run off of electricity. Because they're so blockaded into this small bit of land, they do not have access to water just because they, like you and I do. They don't, right? So if Israel wants to turn off the tap, it turns off the tap. What are the consequences of that?
And the sewage, I mean, they're like the electricity.
Yeah. I mean, you have to be a really sick. Yeah. You have to be a really sick individual to be like, this is okay. I mean, really, truly. So Senator Bernie Sanders had this to say. Right now, there are hundreds and hundreds and thousands of innocent men, women, and children in Gaza who have lost their homes. They've been thrown out of their homes. They have no food. They have no water. They have no fuel. And I remind my colleagues that half of those people are children. And he's right.
Absolutely. And I think even now they said that they're going to allow, I don't know the number, but it's massively insufficient of trucks with humanitarian aid.
Okay. So it's 22 trucks is my understanding coming up. Yeah. Okay. So this is the Rafah crossing. The Rafah crossing is the one that connects Gaza to Egypt.
Right.
And for folks that don't know this crossing is not controlled by Egypt, even though it's the Egypt border with Gaza. It is controlled by Israel. Because of course it is.
Yeah, of course it is.
So if they want to cut off anything, they can do that. They've already bombed the Rafah crossing, I think 3 times this week.
After telling them they could get safe passage there.
I know, it's insane. I just make it make sense. Okay, so now I want to turn to State Department official resigns. So there's a State Department official. His name is Josh Paul, and he is just, I've had enough. Bitches, I'm out, to put it one way. So top State Department official quits, blasts Biden for failure in Middle East on his way out the door. A veteran State Department official has resigned from his post to protest the Biden administration's support of Israel amid the ongoing Israel-Gaza conflict. Josh Paul, who reportedly served as the Director of Congressional Aid and Public Affairs for the State Department's Bureau of Military Affairs for over 11 years, complained in a public resignation letter that the president has blind support for one side, is producing policy decisions that are short-sighted, destructive, unjust, and contradictory to the very values we publicly espouse. The response Israel is taking, and with it, the American support both for the response and that for the status quo of the occupation, will only lead to more and deeper suffering for both the Israeli and the Palestinian people. I fear we are repeating the same mistakes we have made these past decades, and I decline to be a part of it for any longer. Good for you, Josh Paul. I think you're correct.
Good for you.
Yeah, so let's see. According to the Times, Mr. Paul said that Israel's cutting off of water, food, and medical care and electricity to Gaza, a territory of 2 million people, should prompt protections in a number of long-standing federal laws intended to keep American weapons out of the hands of human rights violators. But those legal guardrails are failing. And I agree with that too. The problem with all of these provisions is that it rests on the executive branch making a determination that human rights violations have occurred. He said in his own words, the decision to make a determination doesn't rest with some nonpartisan academic entity, and there's no incentive for the president to actually determine anything.
Yeah, and you can't keep calling it a 9/11.
Oh, no, God, no. I agree. That's weird.
And then expect that people aren't going. I mean, the bloodlust that happened in this country after 9/11, so
was atrocious. Let's talk about that for a second. You're right. So what did we do after 9/11? We were consumed with rage,
we invaded the
anger.
Wrong country.
We invaded a country.
Of their people.
We killed 1 million of our own soldiers. And for what? This country had nothing to do with any of it. And we further destabilized the environment in the Middle East. and we're still paying the price for that day. They're still not back together.
Spring up when you do that.
Correct. So there are consequences to things. So which is why I tend to be the kind of person who's like, well, let's look at what is the root cause of what's happening here. Why is this individual saying or doing what they're doing? Can we correct that? Do they? I mean, even if they're horrifyingly terrible human beings that are doing horrifyingly things, we should try to address the root causes to
how do we get to peace?
Prevent more atrocities from happening, right? Is what I'm 100%.
We have no diplomats in this country, it feels like. They are not diplomats.
No, they're just blind. They have blind support because, and the worst part is they all say that they're, let me just say this. The worst part is they all think that they're like on the side of the Jewish people. That is not true. Nobody is on the side of the Jewish people in any of this. They're on the side of business interests, political interests.
Military,
I was going to say, we need a base in the Middle East that's friendly to us. Like the notion that any of this has to do with having love for the Jewish people is fucking bullshit.
Right.
And the same thing is going on with right-wing extremists here, like white supremacists, whether it's Nick Fuentes, whether it's Richard Spencer. All of these individuals want to use this conflict to further their bullshit too, right? Whether it's siding with the Palestinian people or whether it's being like Richard Spencer is like, yeah, I'm okay with Zionism. It's an ethno-state. I like ethno-states. Yep. Let's make all the Jews move there so I don't have to have them around me anymore.
Yep, that's the next step.
But that's already happening. Richard Spencer has publicly said things along this line for a couple of years now. So it's, I caution people to really consider
careful whom you ally yourself with.
Right, which is why I go back to my original premise of this entire show. The real problem here is this ideology of right-wing extremism, whether it is theocracy, authoritarianism, ultra-nationalism. This is what's driving this entire conflict from start to finish. All right, so I want to turn now to this story of Israel banning journalists and news organizations, because again, I want to drive home that this is not unusual.
That's what democracies do.
So in particular, Israel to ban Al Jazeera for reporting on Gaza war. I also want to point out that a journalist from Reuters was killed a couple of days ago on the border of Lebanon and Israel. He was with another group, a press corps, he was live streaming when it happened. I don't know how many folks saw this, but they were there covering possible conflicts there. And an Israeli strike happened. He died. 6 others were injured. It was very serious. And none of them were with Hezbollah. So they cannot possibly say they were embedded with Hezbollah or some other bullshit. That's just simply not true.
Yeah.
All right. So Israel is reportedly set to ban Al Jazeera's operations in the country over its coverage of the war. Al Jazeera is one of the few global media networks that has reporters on the ground in Gaza. In related news, the Committee to Protect Journalists said at least 17 media workers have been killed since the start of the war. 13 of them were Palestinian, 3 were Israeli, and 1 is Lebanese. So that's not okay too. All right, so let's turn for a second to Hamas. What about Hamas, right? So I have no treaty with anybody that thinks Hamas isn't a terrorist organization.
Right.
It is. Yeah, those crazy anti-fascists known as Hamas. No, I don't think so.
Right.
They are 100% a right-wing terrorist organization, not up for debate. That's a fact. If you want to tell me that they've never killed women and children, I'm going to laugh at you. Of course they have. They have a whole history of doing that, stemming back to the 80s, where they were involved with suicide bombings. And again, all of this is reactionary, right? So you were talking about this earlier, Leila, how you have reactionary sides, so settlers do something, then, Hamas does something, then Israel does this. And like all of this has just been escalating back and forth. So I want to play this quick video from The Guardian, only because I know for a fact that all of this footage has been verified and it's accurate. Oftentimes you'll see video on Twitter or Telegram, never. You have no fucking idea where it's coming from, whether it's accurate, whether it's been verified, whether it's cosplaying, whether it's from a different war. Who knows? I mean, who knows? Yeah. But all of this video has been verified, so I want to play this real quickly so folks have an idea of exactly what happened on October 7th. I'm not going to assume that everybody knows at this point. They should, but who knows? Having said that, let's take a quick look at this. So can you imagine, though, I want to, I look at this footage of these last two women, they're hiding behind a car. They're happy to get out there. I mean, can you imagine you're born into the state of Israel, right? You are not a settler. You didn't move there from someplace else. You were born there. And then you find yourself in this mess. Yeah. You cannot fucking tell me that all of these victims had anything to do with anything the state did, and that they're not innocent victims as well. Of course they are. And if what I just said pisses you off, you should probably check in with yourself. And I'm being serious right now.
I mean, they are complicit the way we're complicit when George W. Bush invades Iraq. And honestly, I do understand why some people would find us complicit, as much as I spoke out against it. I understand, but yes, you're right. They are innocent. And the parents of some of the hostages who were taken have been protesting, calling for a ceasefire. They want their children back. They don't want them to be killed. And they are being attacked by right-wing extremists
in Israel. You're correct on this. We're going to talk about that now.
Oh, sorry. I keep doing that. Sorry.
That's all right. No worries. But you're not wrong on this. So my point is that, again, there is innocents that are getting killed across the board. The only solution here, and I've said this repeatedly, I'm going to say it again, the only solution here is ending the occupation. I believe that it's grotesque what's been going on. And that is why this is happening. But that doesn't mean that the people that are losing their lives in this aren't
victims.
Yeah. Right. So I just want to point that out. So, historically, just so folks know a little bit more about Hamas, because I think people forgot where these folks came from. They were formed in 1987, so many decades ago. At the time, there was a different group, a secular group called Fatah, I can never say that properly, that was secular, part of the PLO, Palestinian Liberation. This was a secular organization, which was better, right? They weren't Muslim extremists. They were secular. Again, all the Palestinian people aren't Muslim. Many of them are Christian. They came more militant because of the increased settlements that was happening in the West Bank, right? So there was a series of suicide bombings that happened in the late 90s, early 2000s. Lots of life was taken in those. They were publicly fighting with Fatah because they didn't think that Fatah was ever going to bring about the liberation of the Palestinian people, and that they were too weak, that they were too willing to negotiate with Israel, and they were. PLO wanted to have Oslo Accords. We can go back to then, whether you agreed with them or not. But there were moments in time where a two-state solution might have been possible and made sense, but it was definitely killed off by the right-wing extremists on both sides. Let me be clear. The Israelis will say that it didn't happen because of the Palestinian people. That's a lie. Don't let them tell you that. There were plenty of people in the Israeli government who were also right-wing extremists that are like, no, we want all the land. Fuck that. From the sea to the sea, it is ours. We're going to expel all of them. So that's always been part of the conversation.
And as we said before, Netanyahu helped finance and grow Hamas. He needed that.
That is true. We have discovered that through the documents that Israeli journalists got their hands on a couple of decades ago that pretty much spelled out this divide and conquer attitude. Well, if we divide and conquer the Palestinians, it'll make our job easier to take all the land from them. This is absolutely true, everything you're saying. So part of that is also to be blamed on this. You know, this is sort of like, it reminds me of this Pied Piper idea. Like, let's, the DNC engaged in, let's elevate
millions of dollars to MAGA candidates. Yeah.
And expect no bad consequences for that. And you're on the outside going like, are you serious?
Yeah.
That makes sense to you? So, you know, I just want to make sure that we address that. I want to close the show today about, there's with two stories. There's a concept in Judaism called, it's about healing the world, right? Making the world a better place. Everything you do, your actions should heal the world, right? So I am imploring people to think about that as we listen to these two stories. The first story, this is an Israeli peace activist whose parents were killed in the Hamas attack. And he is using his voice at this point to ask for a ceasefire. So let's pull up this. Colin, are we doing the transcript on this or did we do video? I can't remember.
I have the video grabbed here.
You're awesome. Of course you do.
Let me ask you, Maoz, there are people, Israeli families in front of the Israeli military headquarters in Tel Aviv, whose families have been taken hostage, either mother, father, daughter, son, and they are there saying the same thing. We often see them in the media describing the horror of what happened to their loved ones, but then the media doesn't go on to say what they're calling for. What do you demand right now of Prime Minister Netanyahu when you talk about ending the war?
Again, I'm calling and I'm crying, not to Benjamin Netanyahu, not to the leader of the Hamas, not to President Biden. I'm crying for humanity, for the entire humanity, for the entire mankind. I'm crying to stop the war. I'm crying for immediate ceasefire, and I'm crying for hope. Hope that will take us from this cycle of blood to a new and bright future. We must build hope. We must build a future, and this future must be based on equality, on partnership, on peace. And this is what I'm crying for. And it's not to blame this or the other, this person or the other. They are irrelevant anymore. We must build a new system.
We want to thank you, Mao.
I hate when that happens. Live TV.
Yeah.
And then I want to play a second video that is similar. So again, these are family members that lost people in the attack on October 7th, and they are calling for a ceasefire and no collective punishment.
If you can talk about what happened on the border, the Hamas attack, called the worst mass slaughter of Jews since World War II, and yet why you continue to talk about the end of the occupation and how critical that is, the occupation of Palestinian territories.
Yeah. Thank you, Amy. The attack against civilian Jews in Israel on Saturday was shocking, was terrifying, was awful. It shook many in my community and myself to the core. Many Israelis in my community themselves critical of the Israeli government and the occupation, but having family throughout the state, myself having friends in the land as well, it was terrible to hear about just as I was setting up for Simchat Torah services on Saturday morning, where we then danced around with the Torah to music similar to Brevila, who we just heard. We did so to sanctify life, and that ultimately is why I have been outspoken against the Israeli occupation for a few decades now. Life is the utmost. It is the most core teaching that I have received from my tradition, from my ancestors. The idea that never again means never again for anyone means that in the West Bank and certainly in Gaza right now, where we are on the verge of a complete nightmare, must be spoken out against, must be called back toward reason, toward the interdependence, toward the ways in which Jews, Israelis, Palestinians, and everyone living in the region, our fates are intertwined. Bombing is bombing all of us, is bombing hope, is bombing reason. We need to de-escalate the situation. I can do what I can do from Seattle. We all must move out of hopelessness and into action by either calling our representatives, by coming together, by reaching out to Palestinian friends in the diaspora, to reaching out to Jews, Israelis who have friends and family in harm's way. The situation has been terrible for many, many years. And the context of the occupation, of the atrocities for the last 75 years must be reconciled. To face them is not to say anyone is bad, no one deserves to be killed, and yet we have to face them, we have to make things right. It is the teaching of the tradition that I came up in and now represent as a rabbi.
Heal the world.
Yeah.
That is, as far as I'm concerned, the key teaching of Judaism. I do want to say this. I feel that, God, that's so hard, Lindsay, that brings tears to my eyes. I feel that what's happening now is detracting from the fact that there are also still hostages that are being held by Hamas. Somebody in the chat just said, if Mossad is the best in the world, why can't they find them? They can. There is miles and miles of tunnels that exist under Gaza that have been dug out through the years. I have no doubt that that's where they're probably hiding partially. And for this reason, I can say that the bombing is just really killing off civilians and children at this point. You're not getting Hamas. You're never going to get Hamas this way. I think they know this. I think the ultimate goal, and I don't say this lightheartedly, I think the ultimate goal is to take out as many Palestinians as they can because they want to seize more of the land. This is why they told them to evacuate to the south of Gaza Strip. Now, mind you, just to give context to this too, this is a territory that is as big about the state of Washington, D.C., but with little over 2 million people in it. So it's very congested already. Cutting Gaza in half is inconceivable. It's inconceivable to me. That is a death sentence as far as I'm concerned. I also want to point out that according to another report on Democracy Now, 22 of the hostages have been killed in these bombings. So now instead of bringing these hostages home to these families, they're being killed by the IDF's bombs. How does this make sense? How does that make sense? It doesn't. So the pleas for a ceasefire are falling on deaf ears. Oh my God, I'm getting tears from this. They're falling on deaf ears, and partially it's because our government is whole hog supporting what's going on and not questioning any of it. They're giving the keys to their drunk uncle to drive through town at a high speed and not think about the consequences of what they're doing. And it's disgusting. I just don't know what else to say beyond that.
It's awful, Tina. I think, I don't know on your side, and I'm sorry in the middle of this, but I am totally black. I don't know if you can see me anymore.
I can see you, but you know what? You're okay. So wildly, it's a really interesting photo of you. You're frozen.
Okay.
It's probably an internet thing.
Yeah.
But we can hear you perfectly.
All right. I'm so sorry, and I agree with you entirely. And there's a saying I go back to quite a bit, and it's an abolitionist, Mariam Kaba. I think she's quoting somebody else, but that hope is a discipline, because I think it's really hard to have hope right now. I think our leaders are all in to endorse this bloodlust, and we will never get to peace that way. So I agree with you. I'm so grateful that we had this conversation and that you brought so much history into it.
No, thank you for joining me. I could not think of a better person to do this with. And again, just to recap. Oh, wait, also, do we have super chats, Colin? I don't even know. Or interesting comments you want to throw up?
Oh, we got one super chat here.
All right, let's bring that up. Thank you for doing the live discussion. That is from, hang on, I got to put my glasses on to read the screen. Paula Psyche. Thank you, Paula. We appreciate that. Thank you for joining us today. It is a Friday, so try not to get too depressed and devastated about the news in the world. Hug your family and know that you can make a difference. If we all sort of, decide that we don't want to live in a world that's full of, extremism and hatred, where ultra-nationalism, where authoritarianism, where theocracy, things of this nature, lead people down dark tunnels, lead people to another group, to hate another group for no reason. We do have the power to change that. And often enough, it takes just, actually having a conversation. That's simple, something as simple as that. Absolutely. So with that, thank you again for joining us on Right Wing Insanity this Friday, and have a fantastic weekend.
Thank you.